Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show on parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me, as always, are my co host, Keith Bogan,
I'll see you later in the morning.
Doug Hamadike. No, he's not. No, he's not. Force of habit. Chad Holloway
Buenos dias.
and Dave Dusenberry. Dave?
Quiet today.
Yeah, I'm here. Apparently, my connection is not.
Today, we're going to be talking about influences and role models in society, stemming from we're having a conversation about Deion Sanders, who is in his first year as coach of the Colorado Buffaloes football team. There was an incident, so to speak, last night or yesterday afternoon with a coach commenting that he basically said that Deion, when he approached him, was wearing his hat and sunglasses like he always does because he's Deion Sanders. And basically the guy said, my mother raised me better, that he should have taken his hat and sunglasses off. Now, there could be other aspects to that there's a possibility that with the health issues Deion has, he may actually need them. No, I know, but it is possible that with different kind of ailments, it is possible that you need them. But anyway, who wants to kick us off?
I was the one who brought that particular one up when we were off camera. So I will say I'll jump in here. The coach, I think, was referring to the fact that you never see him in public anymore, unless, especially in press conferences, unless he's wearing his hat and sunglasses. And his words were, my parents raised me to remove my hat and sunglasses if I was talking to other adults. And as I just learned from Dave, apparently Coach Sanders' response to that was to go out and buy the entire football team sunglasses. Okay. And for me, I love the Deion persona. I love all the atmosphere, the circus atmosphere that goes on around it. I think it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of buzz. The kids are having a great time. The reason I have a moment to pause, and maybe I'm just old and get off your lawn guy, I don't know. But kids will imitate football players because they're young. They're obviously young. They're in high school, they're in college, whatever. And we all say, well, this is the time to go out there and do crazy stuff and be, obnoxious and do whatever you want, as long as you don't break the law, but, go, have long hair. I say this to Jeremy all the time. Go grow your beard, have a good time, look like a woolly man, from the mountains. I don't care. He likes that. Once you get to the real world, once you leave your education and go to get a job, you're probably going to need to shave it, or at least keep it, trim, which he does not do. Coach Sanders is taking us into a different realm, if you will. And much like, and I hate, I don't want to go into politics, but I referenced earlier our most recent former president, who also changed the behavior of the Oval Office and changed the way he provided a role model to people, which is part of the president's responsibility. Just like a coach's responsibility on a football team, the responsibility to provide somewhat of an adult role model. And Deion has gone out of his way to lessen that adultness, if you will, and make it more acceptable for kids to think that once you leave school and go into adult jobs, perhaps you could still behave that way. I don't know. I'm sort of wrestling with it. And it does bring up the whole topic for me of, well, who are my kids watching? Besides, I'm very conscious that they watch their mother and their father, and that we are role models to our own kids. We're the first and foremost role models. But who else? Who else gives them the lessons for what they should do once they go on to real life?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think historically, especially when it comes to sports, whether it's the collegiate level or at the professional level, right? Coaches tend to, I mean, players rally around their coaches. A fine example of that is Coach Belichick up in New England, right? So he comes across as grumpy and surly and not a lot of words. But you talk to any of his players, they say he is an absolute riot, that he's really funny. He's got a great personality. He gets them hyped. He gets them pumped to play. It's just, that's not a side that we see publicly, but it's a side that he shows his players. Coach Sanders is he doesn't maintain that two sides to him. I believe he projects to the public the same thing that he projects to his players. So and that's something that's fairly new, right? Coaches all over the place. I'd say the closest that you could see to something like that would probably be Coach Carroll out in Seattle. He's always been the dude's like 112 years old at this point, but he's still a real high energy guy. He was at USC, he was in his prior coaching jobs, he is in Seattle. But I think instead of the take what you're giving me and just kind of throw it back in your face, he's more of the positive rah-rah type of coach. Like he's a real high energy type of guy. Coach Sanders is the people are going to hate, so give them something to hate. So, and he uses that as a rallying cry for his players.
Right.
And that's not also uncommon in other forms of entertainment. We see that all the time in music. We see all that. We see that in other forms as well. It's just, this is new to see amongst the I guess the traditional leadership roles that like college coaching provides.
Well, I want to bring up one prior incident, and it actually has translated. I believe he did become a I don't think he's a lower level coach, but take the example of someone like Jim McMahon, who in some facets was very similar to Deion and the way he acted and things like that. There was one time when he was a player, where somebody commented to him about always wearing sunglasses, and he joked about it at first, saying, well, I'm the quarterback. But then after it was over, apparently pulled the reporter aside and said, I can't take them off. I can't see without them. McMahon had an incident when he was a child where he got stabbed in the eye with a fork. And he could not see very well out of that eye without those prescription, they were prescription sunglasses. And even to this day, Jim is always pictured with the sunglasses because his eye is, and it came up a couple of, after he was retired, he was doing an interview and he's like, I can't. He finally openly admitted I can't take them off. I had no choice. When I did those interviews, he said, I may not have wanted them on at times. He said, but I had no choice. If I would have taken them off, it would have been disastrous. I wouldn't have been able to do anything.
Now we know why the Bears were such a running and defensive led team.
He couldn't see very well.
Yeah.
He could see enough to throw the ball, but he wasn't the best. He didn't have the best vision on the field. He openly admits that was part of why Walter was so important to him.
Yeah.
I wonder
it's funny. I had just looked him up the other day, and he now lives in Scottsdale, Arizona. This was literally within probably 48 hours. So I'm like, of all the places to live, he can wear sunglasses there because it's sunny, like more or less 364 days a year, right?
Yep.
So, but yeah, I think he's a good
warmer. He's got serious arthritis issues at this point.
Yep.
It's warmer there, and the climate helps him for his arthritis.
Yep. But
It's exactly why he lives where he lives.
Yeah, and I think to talk about Deion Sanders, in the past, and I think Dave made the comment earlier that you see it in players, you don't see it as much in the leadership and the coaches. But I remember back, this is back in the 90s, and Charles Barkley said, I am not a role model. I am not paid to be a role model. I am paid to wreak havoc on the basketball court. Parents should be role models. Yep. But again, that's the player perspective. And then I saw, and I don't know if it was before this game, the most recent game or game previously, but Dion was talking to his team, to his players, and he said, "Hey," he says, "listen," he goes, "I get mad." He says, "whenever people talk about you guys, or whenever they talk about my mama." And his mom was there, and he says, "Somebody says my mama didn't raise me right." I guess it was this game probably. He says, "But here's my mom," and he gave that microphone to his mom, who's like this old lady, and she says, "I told him to be who you are, and if he needs to kick ass, kick ass." That's what she said. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it was pretty interesting, and that was like in front of the team. Like the team was all there. It looked like before they were getting ready to go out. So, he turned it into this whole, like, he took those comments and turned in this whole motivational thing.
Mhm.
They're saying stuff about us. Let's get them.
That's
That's kind of my perspective on it anyway.
Yeah, that's
But
true. I mean, Keith, you brought up the point of, when it comes to role models who our kids choose to be their role models outside of their parents, there are a lot of kids out there that don't have parents for role models, that they
right.
have to go elsewhere to find
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
an example to follow. And, you know, especially amongst collegiate sports, we see that story a lot about players that come up. The reason that they're so good at sports that they get to these high-ranking college places is because they spend all their time on the football field or the practice field, and they're not home because they don't want to go home, right? So,
Where they have no home to go to.
they have no home to go to, or the environment is in a
Right.
given place is just bad, and they seek out sports for the solace and the safety and the structure that it gives, and they sink their lives into it because it's a place of safety. So the role models that they pick up, become, the coaching staff or their peers on the team, or something like that. It's almost like being it's similar, obviously not the same, but it's similar to being in the military. You want to go to a program or a place that's very structured, that gives you purpose, that gives you something to do, a skill that you can learn and excel at, and be able to have a group of people around you that you're all in the same boat. You're all working towards the same goal, right?
Mhm.
So, when you think of it in that way, like I said, I think what Coach Sanders is doing, does it challenge our norms? Absolutely. Um, you know, I- he's he- he's what I picture like what Allen Iverson would be if he was coaching college basketball. You know, like somebody who he's coaching from his own life perspective, which is part of his personality. And you see that
Mhm.
he doesn't have the duality of some of these older, more established coaches that like give one sense to the press because they don't want somebody running a bunch of stories around them. He's taking it from the player's perspective. He's like, I don't give a crap what you say. Like, I'm just going to say what I'm going to say, and as long as his players had, I mean, the difference is he personally had the skill to back it up when he was a player
Right.
consistently.
Mhm.
Now now the onus is on him. He's not doing it himself. He's got to coach up his team
Mhm.
to do that. And in a way, that's a lot more difficult. So I don't know.
There's
I don't mind it.
I got so many stories here. Um, it also challenges the definition of, this incident between the two coaches challenges to me the definition of respect. The idea that why is it that you don't respect somebody if you're still wearing a hat? Why is it that you don't respect somebody if you're wearing sunglasses? So there's a story, I may have told this another time. When I was in high school, I'm pretty sure I was a sophomore in high school, and I had a thing. For me, it was really I didn't believe in God. God just, the religion just didn't work for me at all. Now,
Mhm.
in almost every school that I know, in the morning you get up, you're in homeroom. There's a moment when you all get up and you do the Pledge of Allegiance, and you're taught from a little child, you stand at attention and you put your hand over your heart.
Yeah.
And and you speak the words. And I chose early on, before I even got to high school, that I would stand because I was respectful. My hand never went to my heart, and I never said anything because the words under God were in the wording. And I said, okay, well, I'll be quiet and I'll show respect. And I won't mention the guy's name because who knows, where this recording goes. But someone became very agitated by the fact that I wouldn't speak the words. And he thought that was a sign of not respecting it. So we wound up wrestling, full scale fight. It was one of those rooms where the walls could be removed. So you
Right.
could be bigger.
Partition.
And
Divider
we wound up in the next room. The walls had not been removed. We went through them. But it's such a microcosm of the whole thing. The idea is respect was there. I had no
Mhm.
problem with that. I simply, from myself, didn't want to necessarily say the words out loud. I wasn't saying anything else. I wasn't denigrating the situation. I was simply not saying the words. I chose what level of respect was given, and he chose that it wasn't. And the same way that Coach Sanders is saying, what's this bullshit with a hat? Who cares about the hat? I respect the game. I respect the kids. He's clearly respecting the kids enough to try to give them a better life by making them better players, and he is trying to make them better people. But
Yeah.
he has a somewhat different vision than society seems to have. I got more here because it goes in the same situation category of a suit and a tie. Where has a suit and a tie gone, especially since the pandemic?
I know nobody wears them anymore.
Except in job interviews. The last vestige to me is in job interviews. People still feel compelled, like they haven't quite let go of that yet. Some people still will interview that way, but I can't tell you the last time I was at a wedding or a funeral where I wore a tie. Almost nobody does it, but you'll see people who are like 70, 80, 90 years old still wearing them. But most of society has figured it out that that's not what the respect means. You're not disrespecting by not wearing a tie. I think we all still feel that if you show up at a funeral in a pair of jeans, shorts, and a t-shirt, that's probably disrespect, but maybe that goes away at some point too. It's all a matter of where society is, and Deion is shifting the paradigm in ways I think some people are uncomfortable. It might even have something to do with race, does it really matter if the hat is stolen? It doesn't really matter if someone's wearing sunglasses, whether there's a medical condition or not.
I agree. So it's funny because, well, two things. A, we can thank McCarthy era Congress for the addition to the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Communist Hunt. Before that line in particular was gone from it, and my personal preference, indivisible, makes a lot more sense when you don't put that qualifier before it. That's my personal opinion. Secondly, I actually have I have a pretty unique take and a very strong opinion on the word respect. For me, it's something that people give a lot of weight to, societally wise. I don't really care about the word respect. Never have, because in my philosophical front, respect is a byproduct instead of a thing of itself. Respect comes from doing other things. It's not something of its own. So respect comes from a combination of trust, empathy, and communication. If you engage in those three things, it generates respect, I guess. And a big part of that, and when it comes to Coach Sanders and his approach to his team, he's engaging in those three things. He's engaging in communication with his team. He's engaging in empathy with his team and his players. And he's trusting his players, and his players are returning that back to him. And all three phases of that, that's what generates the mutual respect between the two. And I think that's what gets them fired up. People get fired up and can promote that relationship in a number of different ways, whether it's a business relationship where you're working towards something common, or in Coach Sanders' place, in a sports setting where you have to rely on the guy next to you to be able to make plays so that you can all execute together. And whatever motivational factor works to be able to get everybody to play together is what he's doing. He's taking his particular approach to work with that team. I mean, we're all have exposure to sports teams that haven't been very good, where we've seen collective fallout where those three elements of trust, empathy, and caring and communication were not present, and the entire team freaking falls apart, right? And it's not good. And then people get fired, and then people get pissed, and fans start throwing chairs all over the place. whatever. I think he's reading his team, applying his personality and taking the approach, and his players seem to be gravitating to it. Is it going to last? I don't know. Maybe 2 or 3 years. But we'll see. Maybe it will. Maybe, like Keith said, maybe it'll be a paradigm shift in what we consider expected or okay. It's difficult. It's different now, and different makes people uncomfortable. But the more it's successful, the more it becomes accepted. So we'll see.
Well, I think too, I think what he's trying to do with the whole sunglasses thing is like, he's kind of like, oh, they took a shot at me. Now I'm going to put you in this argument with me. And he's creating an us versus them situation as well. And I think, if you look at, I mean, the example I used earlier was when the University of Miami went and they had the fatigues on. They said, we're at war. It's you versus us. And that's a common thing, right? In sports. I mean, you want to create this animosity from one team for the other. And I think that's a very effective way of doing that. And I think there's all kinds of ways that coaches do that. The other thing I want to comment on was respect versus courtesy. I understand, I guess, because I would say it's respect to remove your sunglasses, but at the same time, respect is a whole different thing. Respect is a much deeper and profound term for me. I mean, I use it kind of summarily, but to Dave's point, it's not about meeting somebody casually on the street. I don't know who that person is. How am I going to know if I respect them or not? Right. But I do see it as a courtesy, and I still I would remove my glasses if I'm talking to somebody, because I always think it's good to see somebody's eyes, and when you're talking, I think you have better communication with that person, and things just operate better from my perspective. The other thing is to Keith's point about how things are changing in our society and how maybe a suit isn't necessarily required for an interview. Maybe the norms are changing, but I think some of that, whenever these norms change, and we have a lot of ambiguity in our society now with regard to norms, and I think that's what's creating a lot of conflict within our society overall. So sometimes it's better if we can agree upon some kind of norms that everybody can abide by, because I think everybody knows how to respond then. Because if one person has one set of kind of rules, if you will, and another person has another set, that's where the conflict occurs, because they go, oh, he didn't take off the sun. And again, this is not the example, but there are other examples. I'm behaving this one way, they're behaving another way, and boom, we're going to just kind of clash.
Yeah.
On
But
that.
I don't think this challenging of the norms is new. I think it's every generation challenges some of the norms.
Absolutely. That's part of adolescence.
In the 60s, younger people challenged the concept of the types of clothes that are worn and the length of hair that was shown.
For that.
Thank you, Dave, for continuing, that look, because now it's a normal look. Now it's not a rebellion now.
I will add to that, because I felt that myself. So when I was 20, no, God, I don't know, long time ago.
I don't remember that part.
I know, right? I was going for a job actually at a local supermarket. I think I was like 18. I was going for a job at a local supermarket, and at the advice of my parents and my peer, the people that I look up to, my leadership example, I had long hair in high school, and I actually cut it all short for this job interview, thinking that I was going to present a cleaner version of myself for this job interview in order to get this job. And I did so. And then I went on the interview. And then I didn't get the job. And I said at that moment, after I didn't get the job, I said, you know what? I'm not going to do this ever again. I like having long hair. I'm going to grow it back out, and I'm not going to compromise that again. I like it. I'm going to do it. And if somebody wants to hire me, they're going to get a damn good worker that happens to have long hair. And I have taken that approach. The last time I had short hair, it was 1992, was the last time I had short hair. And I cut it for a job interview, didn't get it, grew it back out. It's been long ever since, and I've been lucky and graceful enough to be in a position now where I do pretty well, and people look at me more for my skills, my persona, and the way that I work, and not as much, at least for my appearance, for my hair. I mean, I'm 6.5 feet tall, so people are going to notice me anyway. Like, I can't be incognito in a crowd. So having long hair is just like, you're going to see me anyway. So it just kind of adds on to it. I don't care. But people, you know, when I was younger, having long hair meant being rebellious, right? I listened to metal. Like I wore denim jackets with patches on the back. Like I was that guy. And that was considered a more rebellious look, you know, not part of the clean cut standard norm. And I've been able to maintain that, even maintain playing metal and doing music and maintaining a professional career and being a father and a home and you know, that role as well amongst my kids. And you know, in that sense, it's been cool to see what would be considered the standard stereotype of the dad, you know, be modified and changed even throughout my life, you know, because there was a point in time, I mean, amongst my dad's generation, you know, dads didn't have long hair like this. They didn't play in freaking bands until they were 50. Like that didn't happen. You got a professional job, you cut your hair short, and you did that stuff. That's the role. But you know, even amongst my lifetime, that stereotype or that particular example has modified and changed, and society's come to accept it.
You heard me say it earlier in the conversation. What did I say about Jeremy? Jeremy is famous for having this woolly man beard, as I call it, this, you know, this out of control thing, as I call it, because he just hates shaving. And he doesn't really like the look of what he is when he has, which is what he has right now. The Ohio State Marching Band requires a clean shaven look for every single person. In his words, they're actually trying to remove everyone's identity. They're trying to make everyone look the exact same thing. So even if you have long hair as a woman, you have to tuck it up under your hat, and you cannot take your hat off the entire time. Even when you're practicing, even when they're in between performances, hats can't come off. So it's very much homogenizing it and making the entire group look and feel the exact same thing, and taking away personal identity. I wonder if that will ever change too. And by the way, in drum corps, it has changed. So people have very different looks and feels. They have the same uniforms, but everything else is not required at all. So yeah, I'm thinking about, will Jeremy actually, you know, for the last several years, I said, grow the beard now. I don't care. Because when you graduate, you're going to have to, like, you know, do certain things to get jobs. But he's a computer science major.
Mhm.
Will they even give a shit?
Nope.
And he may
I would
not.
say no.
Yeah. So
Probably not.
this assumption that I've grown up with, because I'm the get off your lawn guy, because I'm the old guy here, is that he would have to conform at some point. And I'm starting to get to that point where maybe my advice has been wrong, or maybe I haven't been keeping up with the times, because he is probably not going to have to shave that beard. Maybe he has to shape it a little bit for the first few interviews, but other than that, I think he's going to be fine.
Well, and I went through the same thing with Frankie when he got his, but he's going into finance. So when you're working for a big financial firm, that's a whole different ball game.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, hey, you don't have to shave it off, but I would trim it, to your point, because he did that whole thing too. Just like it just gets to be like a big bird's nest on his face, right? So I'm like, you got to trim it down. You got to trim it down, and then shape it, you know. And I said, go to somebody, watch them do it, figure out how they do it. So he's done that. So he'll try to shape it himself. I said, you got to shave under here. You can't just let this all grow down your neck. And, you know, now he gets a haircut regularly. He's, you know, for his job, and he's looking the part, right? And that's the thing. You have to look the part, from my perspective. And in finance, if you look up who the financial leaders are, typically they're going to be clean shaven. So he's even kind of bucking the trend a little bit with that. But yeah, we went through the same thing. You can't just have this big, he had a giant hair, I don't know what you would call it, but it was just like grown out, and he'd just like push it all back and put a baseball cap on. But now he's he's cleaned up a lot. But I think again, it depends on which area you're going into, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
As college professor, I could do what I want, you know. One of my colleagues dyes her hair 2 or 3 colors. Like the other day, it was like orange and blue. You know, I mean, she was like she was a Dolphins fan or something. And who knows what it'll be like this week. I mean, every 3 weeks she gets it colored, and it's something crazy. And she'll wear things, and she's got tattoos all over her arms and all over her legs, and she'll wear like skirts and that stuff. But that's the stuff that you can do here. But you
I
can't
think
do it everywhere.
tattoos, I think we finally crossed the acceptance bridge on tattoos. I think until maybe 5 years ago, they were still the kiss of death in interviews. And then somewhere around the pandemic, society just broke, literally
Yeah.
broke, and said, you know something? So many people have them. We're going to kill ourselves if we don't have a candidate pool that doesn't discriminate by tattoos, which it definitely used to do, and to a certain extent still does. And I'm speaking with my HR hat on now. And I think, especially in coastal areas, because that's the more progressive areas of our country, especially there, it's the taboo is broken. Still central, the central portions of the country probably still have issues with it, but not so much in the more populated areas. It took all these years. I mean, I grew up in a world where firstly you didn't even get a tattoo, and then if you did, you hid it. If you had anything to do with the job, you couldn't possibly admit you had one. Now it's completely different. And is the art of getting and showing a tattoo any different than the art of wearing sunglasses in a press conference?
The interesting thing is, I think I heard somebody along the way bring race into this. I believe I heard that somewhere along the way.
I mentioned the word, yes.
I see your point, but it's a non-issue. In this case, it's a non-issue. Jay Norville is African American. The coach of Colorado State is African American. So it's completely a non-issue. But with that said, Jay also made the comments before the game with Colorado State. I thought it was after. No, it was before. And Deion's team did pull it out. I didn't see the post game, so I don't know, if he took them off or what, where they actually met it, if they even met at the 50-yard line, because that's even gone by the wayside at times. And you can rattle off a list of names of why that doesn't happen. I think we all know who the person at the top of that list is, of why some coaches will say, fuck that, I ain't going near him. Obviously, we know Bill Belichick is one of them. I mean, but that goes back to Joe Paterno. I remember times with Joe where there were, some exchanges that were not exactly the most pleasant. I remember one incident in particular in a surprisingly well-contested game for a while there, and then Paterno kind of ran up the score against Rutgers, when him and Doug Graber kind of got into it. This is going back about 20 years, in Giant Stadium, because they were working on Rutgers Stadium. So Rutgers was playing their home games at Giant Stadium at the time. We had season tickets, and which kind of sucked for a commute there for a while. Having to go to Giant Stadium a couple times a year was, as often as we did, was kind of annoying. And that was one of the well-contested games, like I said. Yeah, I remember a very heated exchange between Graber and Paterno, and that was clearly about respect. And I think I'm pretty sure that I remember correctly. Paterno ended up telling Doug Graber to go fuck himself by the end of it. But it's not like this. These things do happen. They happen where things get heated between coaches, and I would never say I've seen fights, but I definitely have seen it get heated between coaches. It's happened in some of the NFL games over the years too. I mean, I remember times where, when there was big, kind of a big rivalry between them, when things got testy between Bill Walsh and Bill Parcells. And then there was one game in particular I remember. Um, there's video of it. It was a particularly bad year for, I believe, the Niners, and the Giants were really, really good. And Bill ran a sweep, which isn't really run very often. Straight sweeps are not ran very often in the NFL, or weren't at the time. And dude, they broke the play within like a second. It was like they were waiting for them to try to turn the corner, and they just destroyed the running back, which I believe was Roger Craig. Um, and and Parcells kind of looks at him like, and then you see Walsh's face, and he's like, he goes like this. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
They had a particularly interesting relationship. Even, and then after Walsh retired, it was clear that they were friends the whole time. But there were times where, Parcells especially would take particular issue with something Walsh did in a game where they were such great rivals at the time, even though it just depended year to year on which team sucked sometimes.
Yeah.
Which usually at the time was the Giants, except for 1986.
Yeah, pretty much.
But there's always been some interesting relationships. Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick don't have the best relationship when they play each other. They do at the end of the game, because they are friends, and they do.
Yeah.
But when game time happens, forget it.
Well, it's it in sports especially, and we see this throughout professional lives, but especially sports. Sports is very much an emotional game, right? So you use emotion to get yourself fired up to go out and execute, and you run those high emotions the entire game. The coach is really pushing it to his players to get them fired up to go out and execute, do what they got to do. When you get to the end of the game, you have this crossroads, this kind of conflation between, you have mutual respect, you have sportsmanship, and you have pride, right? So sometimes those three things don't all sit well together. If you're getting your ass kicked 65-0, you're playing an emotional game, you take that personally, and that does not lend itself to a high level of sportsmanship at the end sometimes. I think that's to be able to get to the place where you can disconnect the final score at the end of the game once the thing is done, and be able to say to the opposing coach, just kicked your ass for 3 hours, hey, awesome job. That's a challenge to pride, and that comes with a certain level of maturity. And there's a part of you that's not something that's easily done, to translate from personal pride to maturity, mutual respect, and sportsmanship. So that transition gets a little funky sometimes.
Yeah, I just watched the Ohio State team totally maul Western Kentucky yesterday. It's one of those games where I'm of the opinion should not be allowed to happen.
I agree.
It's 63-10.
I agree.
Western Kentucky must have thought things could have been much more competitive. I mean, it was 14-10 early in the second quarter. But did the coaches shake hands at the end of the game? Sure, they did. Yeah. The players milled about each other, and there was no fighting or anything. They were all very respectful of each other. Western Kentucky actually is awful. They don't seem to have fingers on their hands because they can't hold anything. They keep dropping everything they have. Not that Ohio State started that game much better, but I think it's worse when you go into the game where you think it's going to be competitive, and then it turns into a rout like that. And sometimes the coaches get really ornery about it. Rutgers is, and speaking as a Rutgers alum, for years we keep begging to try to be competitive, and we never really get there. So when we get mauled 58-0 by Ohio State or Penn State, it's just frustrating because we can't seem to get to being a real Division I school. But Shiano always shakes hands at the end of the game.
Yeah,
Fiery guy, and he'll yell at he'll yell at coaches and he'll scream about them, and he says a lot of stupid shit, but he always shakes hands.
yeah. Excuse me while I laugh in Tim Pernetti.
I vaguely remember that name. It's history for me.
He was the athletic director that was fired because of the Mike Rice issue.
Are we talking about
Mike Rice or Ray Rice?
We're talking about
Mike Rice,
Mike Rice. You're right. Mike
his
Rice.
basketball coach.
Yeah.
He was fired for hitting one of his players. Pernetti suspended him and then decided to fire him, or suspended him for something. Then he suspended him for the whole season. Pernetti, it cost him his job, but in the end, Pernetti kind of, when he was out, pretty much admitted that he never thought that Rutgers should have been in the Big Ten. He kind of said he sat there and did his job, but did protest when they said they wanted to go join the Big Ten. He kind of said, "We're not ready for that," and he was right.
And all these years later, we're still not ready for that.
In basketball, we're slowly getting ready for that. In football, we're still a long ways from ready for that.
Yeah, no kidding. I want to go back to something Chad said earlier about quoting Charles Barkley. I forget if we had started the recording or not at that point.
Yes. Yes, it's in there.
Concept, players are fighting back and saying, I'm not paid to be a role model, I'm paid to play. And yet the players' unions in all four major sports, and soccer for that matter, and players' union and the ownership of the teams are in full agreement on the topic of domestic violence, which I think is a good thing. They are so angry about it, and they feel that it's so important not to have any of their players guilty of that they'll basically they won't end their careers, but there's very, very severe penalties. You'll lose an entire season if you're found to have been involved in that at all. And heaven forbid you found it, it happens again a second time, your career is over. And they're completely in lockstep on that. And it's all based on the concept that athletes are role models. You can't have a domestic violence abuser in a professional sport because that's showing the wrong message to the fans. Well, that's called being a role model.
I mean, you think about it, the number one thing that comes with sports, especially amongst the fan base of sports teams, what happens? People buy merchandise, they wear jerseys, they wear things that support the team. It becomes part of your identity. I know as a longtime Niners fan, and I have 1 or 2 or 30 jerseys, I think, at this point. That wearing that, the reason that I go out and buy a jersey for a player is because I admire what they do on the field, or in some cases I had high hopes for what that player would do on the field. It didn't actually turn out that way.
Jimmy Garoppolo. Sorry, Garoppolo.
No, Reuben Foster. Yes, I own a Reuben Foster jersey. I'm in recovery. But you get these jerseys or you get this gear because you idealize what the player or the team does on the field. They execute well, they play well. We don't talk about the Jets. The Jets are exempt from this. But there's something about either the team or the organization or something that you admire, and the players, by playing for that organization, are a reflection of that organization, and the team organization as a whole knows that that's a key part of their marketing. That's why that topic comes up, because you want to be able to put your team or organization in the best light possible, because that encourages people to support your team. I mean, wins on the field, yes, but if your players are complete assholes, that becomes a problem when it comes to support. I mean, unless you're Philly and you support your team no matter what, no matter who's on it, and then everybody else can go screw.
Right.
I think a part of that too is that the players want to be behave enough to have, if they're good players, to get like the sponsorships and have a partnership with somebody. Because just think about how much money they make from that. Think about Michael Jordan. His basketball salary is nothing compared to what he makes and other things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket. So I mean, from that perspective, I certainly understand why people would want to excel at their sport. But I think also doing that, it helps when they have a little bit of personality. And, to Keith's point, the domestic violence, that's a crime, right? But I mean, not wearing your shades, that's a faux pas or something that's controversial, maybe, or maybe not. But it just stirs the pot a little bit. But still, it's not illegal. It's not taking somebody else's rights. So I see kind of a difference in some of the things that we're talking about. If somebody's committing crimes, then that's a whole different ballgame. But if somebody just
I only brought up domestic violence, and gambling could go into the same category. The number one reason that sports and the unions, the labor unions in sports and the ownership of sports agree wholeheartedly on that is because they look at players as role models, that it will damage their brand, it'll damage their merchandising, it'll damage their sales.
Yep.
They actually don't give a rat's ass if they break the law. The Dallas Cowboys are a perfect example of that. The Oakland Raiders, now the Las Vegas Raiders, are an example of that. They constantly sign players who have come out, broken the law, and they got suspended for 2 or 3 games or for 6 games or whatever, and then they come back. Sorry, Jay, I had to throw that in there.
Well,
the Philadelphia Flyers are an example of that. The Philadelphia Eagles are an example of it. Anything Philadelphia is an example of that. Oh, I'm going to hear some shit from some fans on that one. That's for sure.
But it's
Jacksonville Burris. Let me remind you of that one.
It's interesting.
He never came back.
Giants fan.
He never came back. What are you talking
Yes,
about?
he did.
Oh, he came back for like 10 seconds and there was nothing left.
Yeah.
Still came back.
When you shoot
Mr.
yourself in
Giant
the
fan.
leg, I mean, he literally shot himself in the foot.
Leg, but who's counting? Anyway.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, I mean, and then going back to that.
But the point is, it's an example that they don't care about the law part of it. They're more compared to it's damaging the brand and the merchandising opportunities and things like that. And that's why they react to it the way they do. They are acknowledging that the players are role models.
Look at Josh Gordon.
Yeah. Look at Colin Kaepernick. That's a guy that didn't break any laws.
It's different.
But that's a guy that didn't break any laws, but is seen as unmarketable because there's a portion of the society that said what he did goes against their perceived value. He didn't do anything illegal. Nobody's going to touch that dude with a 25-foot pole. Then you got, like you said, you got a guy like Josh Gordon, who actually probably played pretty damn well for the Seattle Sea Dragons last year for the XFL. He did pretty well. He's a big dude. But for the crazy crime of smoking pot, because oh my God, he just got suspension after suspension.
There's like 3 DUIs in there too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more to it than just smoking pot.
And it's interesting because we talk about this, and there's clearly some line of demarcation over exhibiting personality and you are no longer an asset to this organization, right? We've had lots of players in our time walk that line. And I think now Coach Sanders is trying to, in a way, he's kind of setting that line on the coaching level, not in the player level, but he's seeing where that line goes at the coaching level, which is something historically we haven't seen a whole lot of. And it'll be interesting to see where society as a whole decides where that line stops and becomes unacceptable for his approach, or whether his approach people find perfectly fine.
Well, there'll be one that's going to be interesting that we'll see what has to happen, what happens to, which I don't think much will happen to. Yesterday, or actually, I believe it was Thursday night, we heard about it Friday morning, that Cavaliers president, Kobe Altman, was arrested for DUI.
What did he do?
DUI.
Yeah. Usually that costs you your job, especially if you're in management.
I guess we'll see. It hasn't yet.
I
mean-
could turn this into a very, a very intense debate where we would definitely not agree if we talked about the role models in professional wrestling. I for one, and Jay knows this, I for one find the sport repulsive beyond comprehension.
Mhm.
I also find UFC stuff to be on the level of it shouldn't be allowed, it should be illegal because it promotes violence in such a bad way. At least, so UFC definitely not, because it's actually, they're really doing it.
Yeah.
We all know that professional wrestling is totally scripted. Yeah, they are technically still throwing each other around, but it's all scripted shit. So I won't use the word fake, Jason. I won't use the word fake too often. I don't want to use the word fake or anything. Sorry, never mind. But it's scripted stuff. But those people are held as role models by a lot of people. In fact, it makes, and Jason, you're a wonderful father, but I watch your girls watch wrestling, and I'm like, oh my God, no, don't watch that, don't watch that, don't watch that. It was never allowed on the screens in our house, and thank goodness my boys never were interested in watching it. But there's so many different types of people who could be role models in society. And I, for one, I have not advanced myself enough and, stopped being the get off your lawn guy enough to be comfortable with that sort of role model, anything that's connected to a violent activity. I stopped being a boxing fan somewhere around the Mike Tyson era, when it went from punching each other and eventually, you go 15 rounds and eventually somebody would win, to Mike Tyson literally almost killing people.
Well, I'll go back.
Couldn't do it anymore.
I'll do you one better. If you want to talk about boxing, I'll do you one better. Look up the name Luis Resto.
I don't know that name.
Look up the name Billy Collins.
How do you know so much about this stuff?
There's a documentary you might want to see called Assault in the Ring.
Mm-hmm.
Louis Resto was given in a fight, a journeyman fighter by the name of Louis Resto fought an upcoming young boxer by the name of Billy Collins. Man by the name of Panama Lewis took some of the padding, a large amount of the padding, out of the gloves for Resto, and put a hard plaster of Paris on his fists for the fight.
I know where this is going.
Billy Collins looked like an alien after the fight.
Oh, did he live?
Resto won the fight. Collins never fought again. Collins later committed suicide about 2 years later. Resto did time in jail, so did Panama Lewis for it. It's a documentary. If you have Max, I'm sure it's on there.
And yet, that very story, that's a great thing that you brought up, because that story led to the formation of the UFC. Now, you could say, what are you talking about? That's horseshit. That's actually not horseshit. In the early days of boxing, and from the early days of boxing, people would always say, well, the boxing glove is shaped in a way that, there's nothing to do with the fingers. So, gee, what it would be like if they had more ability to do things. And in boxing, you're not allowed to kick someone in the nuts, and you're not allowed to kick below the waist. You're not allowed to kick at all. You're not allowed to use anything but your fists. What would it be like if you could do more than just punch? Well, eventually, over the years, that became what we now see as the UFC, because it's taken almost all the rules of what happens in boxing away, or what's prohibited in boxing away.
You realize that Muay Thai kickboxing has been around since the 1960s, right?
But
Grandpa?
now it's in the mainstream. And by the way, I'm talking about in the early days of boxing is like the 1800s, the early 1900s, when they, when it started becoming
Muay Thai kickboxing, and that goes back a lot longer than you think it does, but okay.
But kickboxing is also, okay, I punch and I kick, but I don't do anything else.
No wrestling involved. Like, it basically, you moved from So, and in the sport of boxing, right? I believe that boxing done right can be freaking beautiful, right? Because so the way that these guys move, offense, defense, evade, and attack, there's a dance to it. When highly skilled boxers are freaking awesome to watch because it's cool how they're able to get so much power out of such small movements. It's almost like watching a professional like death metal drummer that does blast beats that they move so slightly, but they get so much freaking power out of what they do. It's really cool to watch. But there are guys that they don't go in with the mindset of I am going to learn this technical skill of boxing offense and defense and be able to move my feet, move my body and be able to evade and things like that. They just go in, they just want to start hitting people, right? And that was kind of the mindset when Tyson was coming up. That was both his drawing factor and the thing that made some people pull away from boxing is that he just wanted to get in and just throw down and hit people. He wasn't interested in the dance. He was the bull. He went at people, he attacked, and he was very, very successful at it because at the time, the majority of the boxing world, in terms of the competitors, focused more on the technical aspects. He was just like screw tech. I mean, he knew technique, but he focused. He was all offense, no defense. And obviously that's what brought him down eventually when he was defeated. So, you know, I appreciate the technical side. I appreciate the skill side. I guess the same goes with wrestling. I haven't followed wrestling in a while. I know that these guys can move very, very well. I know that they are definitely athletic folks.
Mhm.
Are they following a script? Yes. Is it predetermined? Yes. Do they still move in a way that's very athletic and highly skilled when they're in the ring? Abso-freaking-lutely. But it's the ones that put the time into learning their craft to be able to execute it on either in a ring or on a TV or whatnot. There's something cool to that. It's the guys that just like the problem is people watch this, they don't see the skill, and they're like, oh yeah, I can just go out and hit people, and then that's the part of the influence that you got to watch, that you got to be careful of.
Well, and I guess with Tyson too, I guess I would disagree a little bit with that because I watched it was like a summary video of all his like knockouts, and this guy was like he was setting them up. He would punch them one way, then another way, and then somehow their head would be like this, kind of down, and he would just like come with that right, boom, and they're done, they're done. But I mean, it was a setup. I mean, the guy he had some sort of technique to what he was doing. He was an animal, but I mean, there's something to be said for that as well. The thing we used to always say is the rule one of any sport is you got to want it, right? And the rule two is rule number one. So you got to have technique, but you also have to really want it.
Yeah.
So I don't know, this moving to MMA and that type of stuff, it doesn't bother me as long as the people are performing voluntarily. But if it's something that they like, let them do it. I don't care. I mean,
again, we're getting away from our topic. I personally don't have any. I could care less if people want to do World Wrestling Federation stuff, MMA stuff, UFC stuff. I don't care about that. What I'm talking about is that it becomes a role model for younger people who don't understand the script. They don't understand the art and the beauty and the technique. They just understand the violence. Just had this conversation a few days ago with a parent and their child, not so young child, I think it was a teenager, about Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto, as we all know,
Get off your high horse.
Lick my balls, you asshole. It was completely banned in my house by me. And then I come home one day and Justin's like 12 years old and there he is playing it. And it turned out that she could have cared less what I thought. And she went ahead and bought the damn thing for him. And I said, fuck that, no way. Give me the disc right now. And it went back to the store that day. But it's also, we live in a society where 6-year-olds are playing that game. And they think that, when I drive a car, I'm just going to, ram every telephone pole and run over people and kill people. And I don't care because they have no ability whatsoever to understand that that's not right.
See,
so it's not that the game itself is evil. It's that it's a role model for the wrong developmental thinking.
See, I disagree in one sense, right? So as this is something that I've talked about with my kids, right? It comes down to, and this is me being their role model, right? So this comes down to, um, are you allowing the game to to teach life lessons to your kids, or are you allowing the kids to play a game and let them treat it as a game, and then say, listen, there's a time and a place for everything. This is contained within the game. This is where it needs to stay. When it comes to my kids, I know my ex was not into the whole GTA thing. I, as somebody who's a musician, I've never been into like censorship and stuff like that. I was like, listen, enjoy what you're going to enjoy. Just know that there's a time and a place for it. Know where the boundary is. This is a game, you know, and you can enjoy it as a game. You could do things that society would frown upon if you tried to act on them in real life. You can act those out in a game and you can have fun doing it. This is not to leave your controller and execute in the real world. That is the parent's job to be able to set those boundaries and say, listen, enjoy what you're going to enjoy. This is where it stays. And that's the approach that I tend to take with my kids.
And,
and
and
I
it's
think
become very well known that especially amongst young boys, the frontal cortex does not fully form until around the age of 25, or in Jay's case, maybe never, but for the most part, it doesn't necessarily fully form until about 25. Yes, Jay. And the reality is, you can, to me, you can parent all you want to a 6-year-old and say, go play this violent game, but it's not real. They're just not, they don't have the capacity to understand it, and it normalizes certain shit in their development at that age.
Yeah, but
They might have more of a capacity to
but 12 or,
sort of
but 12 or
understand it when they're 17 or
but 12 or
15.
13 is a lot more advanced than 6. Like there's a gradient there. My kids were playing freaking, I mean, my youngest at this point has pretty much finished all of GTA 5, and he's 14, and he's done every single freaking mission and executed everything. He's been playing it for a few years now, and he enjoys it. It's just one of those games that he likes. He enjoys the skill level of trying to accomplish these things and get and achieve these goals. He's not looking at it from the I'm going to go beat up all the hookers and take all their money. You can do that in the game, but that's not his goal. He likes the skill aspect of it to be able to play it and succeed at it, just like he does with a lot of his other games.
I think anybody
So
who plays the game is going to enjoy playing the game and the skill level and all that stuff. But what other norms settle into their brain while they're doing it? And I'm not speaking to your kids, because you probably play the game with them. I know in my house, I would go to work. I would be a 9 to 5 guy. I wouldn't get home until 6. But the kids were getting home at 3 o'clock from school, and they're jumping right into GTA, and she's not watching them. So they're literally just playing the game without any supervision, any guidance whatsoever.
And that's where communication comes into play. That's why you have to be able to have an open conversation with your kids about what they're doing, where they're going, and how they're and how they're thinking about it, right? So I talked about it earlier. My big 3 pillars: trust, empathy, and communication. The 3 go together. And with my kids, because we communicate so well, because we communicate so openly, because I respond to their needs when they express it, and they respond to my needs when I express it, all of that stuff develops trust. And that allows me the ability to know that, hey, listen, they're playing the game, they're having a good time at it. They're not going to take the skills that they're learning in this and emulate them in real life, because they've talked to me about that. And that is a thing of trust that I have to have in them, that they understand that this is just a game and this is where it's going to stay. So, it kind of all comes back, and it uses the word, the byproduct of all of that, which we talked about here: respect. Do you respect your kids? Do you respect the actions that they do under your guidance when spoken openly about it? Are you able to communicate that back and forth and achieve mutual empathy and understanding and gain trust? And especially in our cases, 3 of the 4 of us are in cases where our parenting time was split between multiple places, right? So that's a challenge when it comes to developing that trust and communication, because now your kids are exposed to multiple environments with different standards. And how do you manage that? How do you achieve that level of trust, and you could say respect, to your kids, and allow them the things that they do, even on things that society may deem questionable. I feel the same way about GTA as I do about the music that my oldest son listens to. He loves rap. He loves stuff that has a lot of violence and drug use in it, contained in the lyrics. And for me, even if it's not necessarily my cup of tea, I appreciate it from the artistic standpoint because we've talked about it that this is what the artist is expressing. This is how they're choosing to express it. This is not something that these are not lyrics that you want to go to grandma's house and be spewing left, right, and sideways.
Right.
But if you want to enjoy it, if you want to enjoy what the artist is trying to do, they're expressing frustration. They're expressing feelings that they have, and this is their medium to do it. Take it for what it is. Enjoy it for what it is. Understand there's a time and a place for it, but I've always, that's just me and my whole artistic censorship type of thing. This content is put out there for a reason to allow people to enjoy it. As long as you can do it within those bounds, you can talk about it. Then I feel that that's okay.
And I'd echo what Dave said. I think this stuff, there's certainly a certain age restrictions I'd put on it, but I had no problem with Frankie playing GTA when he was 11, 12 years old. But we would talk, and I was involved, and I'm very clear about what can go on. And even with something like MMA, if he would have at 16 years old said, "Hey, you know what? I think I want to be an MMA fighter," I'd be like, I don't know if that's a good idea. But I think just some of the things that were ingrained in him as his growing up, he knew that just like he knew that the world had something better in store for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not that they have a bad life or whatever, but it just he was on a different track than MMA. And I also want to add that it's a good thing Keith was alive when there were gladiators. He would really have a problem then.
couple things I want to bring up. First thing, the basis of MMA fighting, there's one basis to most of it, and that's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which the girls have been doing for 5 years.
Yep.
They're stopping. They're going to stop soon because they're just tired of it, but that's the basis of MMA. Second thing is there's several stories out there. Keith, you may want to do a little research where kids have saved buses full of their classmates while their bus drivers have a problem, literally commandeer the bus and pull it to safety. And it's been pretty well documented that they learn these skills GTA.
Yep.
Now,
I think that's publicity put out by the GTA people. I'm sorry.
no, it's not. It's been on the news, douchebag.
Shit.
Now,
That's Big Rockstar pushing their agenda.
Here's another thing that you may not want to admit. You want to talk about wrestlers and role models. Why don't you go look up and see who the Guinness Book of World Records holder for most wishes granted by Make-A-Wishes? It's not even close.
I'm so glad I brought this up because I knew this was going to be controversial.
It's John Cena.
It's neat now. This is good.
650 wishes. It's John Cena. Who is John Cena?
John Cena had he's so much more than a professional wrestler now. Oh my God. He would not have the money to do that.
Yep, you moron. Same thing with The Rock.
Yeah, well, The Rock has diversified himself quite well from his
Hulk
time
Hogan.
being a linebacker in Miami.
Yeah, I was going to say that. So you're pointing to the only people who found a way to become very famous outside.
There's a lot more than them.
And I would like to point out that I would hope that my time with The Rock influenced him as a role model to be the man that he is today.
And it influences hairstyle.
You would know who I am.
Yeah, and this goes back to our core conversation about role models, right? So what have we talked about today? There are you can find role models in just about any line of work. You can find it in sports. You can find it in entertainment. You can find it in business. Ideally, the best role models for our kids, first and foremost, when they grow up, should be their parents. That should be the first ones. Not all children are blessed with that, but if you are a parent, you find yourself in that position, there is, there should be an expectation that you take that role model role seriously and use it to guide and teach your kids, because that's the foundation that all of their other stuff is going to be based on
Oh
as they
boy.
go through.
And that's exactly what I've talked to Frankie about that, and I've said on times. I said, I said I've tried to live a good life. I have made a lot of mistakes. I said, but that's part of life. I said, so here's some of the things where I think I've really messed up, and and here's what happened, and kind of talk through that. And I said, I hope you don't make the same mistakes as I
Yeah.
do. I
You
hope that you
can't,
can, at least make different mistakes.
and you can't
You
guarantee that
know?
they won't make those same mistakes. You
Yeah,
can't guarantee
well,
that. You can only
they
advise
will.
them. And
They will.
I say this about my kids all the time. Some lessons are learned easy and some lessons are learned hard. I try to guide them to
Yep.
allow them to learn the lesson easy through my experience or others that they know. But there are some that you're just not gonna know until you live it and do it yourself, even if it's been done prior by other people and you have an idea of what the result's going to be. You don't know until you do it yourself.
I think that's a pretty good place to leave us. We're over an hour actually. It's funny you should mention parents being the number one role model. There's going to be more to this story that as the story finally fully breaks, I will inform. When we get off, I'll kind of explain a little bit of what's going on. But there's something going on in Old Bridge that is a great example of what not to be to your children. So we're gonna leave that right here. So from all of us here at Dad's on Life,
Teaser.
take care, everybody. And
Good
Keith, my shorts.
Take care, guys.
Later, guys.